Welcome to the SE Podcast. I'm your host, Justin McRoberts. I met Stephen Roach a number of years ago at an event that he curates called The Breath and the Clay. It's a conference, an arts and faith conference in North Carolina. And I'd heard about The Breath and the Clay through artists who had participated in the conference as presenters and through some folks who had attended the thing. And all of them had something similar to say about it, that it was not just different, but different in this particular way, that they left with a sense of belonging in the world of the arts, that less than leaving just equipped as an artist to make their art, or less than just feeling inspired. More than that, they left feeling like they had a place in the world of the arts. And that's such a vital aspect, I would suggest, of great art, of great culture, and of life. Not just feeling equipped internally, but feeling a sense of belonging and place in my world and in my particular culture. We've become friends since then. We chit chat off and on, and I've been looking forward to this interview for a long time, namely because over the last 18 months to 2 years, since the last Breath in the Clay event, Stephen has spent a considerable amount of time investing in his own health and his own place in his own life and his own culture, that he's actually spent the time to attend to who he is as he does what he does. That, I think, is the engine behind great art lives and great careers. So it is. I was thrilled to do this conversation. I enjoyed it. I think you will too. All Kinds of Early is actually the 5 a.m. meeting / prayer call I had this morning. It's one thing, bro. It's 100%. It's like one thing entirely to be like, yeah, 5 a.m. I get up and I do my own thing, right? It's me, a candle, and like something, with, maybe creativity. But when it's like it's like a meeting with people in another time zone, and they've been awake for hours.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah. Judy, what Judy said, it's Judy, right? I'm sorry, Adam. What Adam said, like this whole other thing.
Yeah.
5 a.m. meetings.
I don't even think God's awake that early, bro.
That's, I think, why those meetings go so poorly. The Lord's like, you're on your own. You want to schedule that crap at 5? I start at 9. I'll see you.
That's hilarious. You want me to start my recorder?
Yeah, hit it.
All right. Mic check 1, 2. Justin McRoberts podcast, take 500.
I think we've only really just done the 2.
Yeah.
We've tried several times. We've made several attempts to get the time set aside.
That's right.
Catch me up. How are you doing? This is the kind of, February is sort of the end of the dead season. Like the first week of February is like everyone has an excuse from about, post Thanksgiving through most of January to get really nothing done.
Yes.
And mostly just outside of feeling bad for yourself. That's really the one thing everyone's allowed to accomplish through December, January. And then this is like the beginning of the ramp up season.
Totally.
How are you feeling?
Yeah, man, I'm actually feeling really good.
I love that.
Really excited. I have 2 different possible publishers that are interested in doing a book with me.
Oh my gosh.
I've been having conversations with people about doing some Makers and Mystics live events. We started off this year. I spoke at a retreat for artists in Nashville, outside of Nashville, and that was awesome.
Cool.
So life is coming, and we're already starting to talk about Breath and Clay and possibly a 2024, relaunch. So,
boy, that'll be a moment.
Yeah. No freaking kidding.
I will be there with bells on.
Will.
Might even literally just do the bells on thing just to be like, sometimes we mean it. Let's start there and talk about like I came into contact with you through some mutual friends who'd been to Breath in the Clay, and mostly knew the event, and then met you as I set up trying to get there. Come to find out, you and I share this juggling act history that we started somewhere, and both both of us predominantly with music.
Yes.
And now men well into our 40s look around and someone says, what do you do? Like when you get past the conversation, you're not like, I'm not wrapped up. We'll talk about this too. I'm not wrapped up identity wise in what I do. But when someone asks like, okay, what do you do? And I can talk about a number of things. Similarly, I know you as a curator. I've read your books. I'm familiar with your music. You coach, you do some retreat teaching, leading. Like there's a whole, list, menagerie, soup of things that you do. Talk about that process a little bit. You feel free to go as long as you want here. Talk about that process and specifically the reinvention part of it, because you are now in another reinvention phase.
That's right.
So talk about like growing in a career that is as broad as yours. Talk about that history, and then like specifically what it means to reinvent in those seasons and to kind of start over ish.
Yeah.
What's been your experience?
That's a great question, man. And I think part of it just goes back as I'm scanning over my own history, like what are the motivators that sparked reinvention? And sometimes it's just that I get bored and my curiosity takes me somewhere else.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's kind of a forced reinvention out of necessity.
Yeah.
So many different motives that can, opportunities come up that you didn't see. And you're like, oh, okay, maybe I need to go this direction. So
yeah,
it's a bit of a dance, but even in my life musically, you're talking about music, dude, my first band was total black metal, death metal, yeah. We used to wear choir robes, painted fingernails. I was goth to the core,
I love it.
I went from there, reinvented, and became kind of a 60s psychedelic, Jim Morrison and the Doors meets Tool.
And everyone knows exactly what that sounds like. We're all familiar with that genre.
Exactly. And I went from there, and then I had a short jaunt through Christian worship.
Yeah.
And from there ended up in, world music, because I've pursued ethnomusicology and all kinds of weird instruments from all over the world most of my life. So that reinvention thing felt normal to me when it came to music.
Yeah.
But there definitely was a point when I felt the stirring that music was only one expression of what I had to offer, of what I wanted to give. And that's when we began to curate the Breath in the Clay and began to do these creative arts events and help other artists find their own ways of reinvention, And so
was there a thread?
I mean, for sure.
One way to one thing I hear when you talk about your early music journey experience is some folks really do kind of chase a place inside a genre, right? Like a folk artist or a metal artist. Was there a thread that tied music together? I think I know this a little bit. Like, it's not like you grew up in like a metal family. Like your family wasn't. You guys, there wasn't metal.
Not
you guys were kind of bluegrassy.
Absolutely.
Like,
yeah, my mom was one of 15 kids. My mom was one of 15 kids, and they were all bluegrass pickers, sharecroppers down in North Carolina, lived in a 2-room shack. And then my dad was a 3rd-generation fiddle player from the Appalachian Mountains. And so, I tell people jokingly, I was condemned to be a musician from the start.
There's something to that, though. I mean, it's like, but what it seems like you fell in love with wasn't bluegrass, but music. Yeah. And there's kind of a difference there.
Totally. Yeah, it took me until my adult years to actually appreciate the heritage that I had from my family, because I was just so rebellious, and maybe it was the artist in me that just wanted to push the envelope and be, okay, well, if you're bluegrass, then that means that's what I can't be, but it took me maturing as an artist and as a person to recognize there was a beautiful heritage there, and that innovation and tradition weren't mutually exclusive, and that there was a beauty that both of them could offer my life.
Innovation and tradition aren't mutually exclusive. That's magic right there.
There you go. Yeah.
It takes a minute to get there.
Yeah, it does. You know.
Just by nature of to some degree a little bit like a this is actually a comedic doorway into innovation and tradition, but also maybe like a deeper glimpse into like you and your history. Do you mind telling the story about like you had a gig? You had this gig when you were in the metal band.
Oh yes.
You got yourself a gig. You were stoked about the gig, and you wanted to provide like a little extra
Oh yeah.
for the show. You and I joked about Paul Stanley a little bit over text right before this interview.
That's right.
And they did pyrotechnics the whole night. I really want my folks to hear this story about you, your metal band, and trying to like expand the expression in the moment.
Oh yeah. I mean, pyrotechnics, homemade pyrotechnics is the best, let me tell you. So backstory to the backstory, I grew up in a little small tobacco town at the northern tip of North Carolina. And, there was nothing there, at all besides tobacco. And that was about it. So the artist in me was always looking for something else. And even at 13, I was 13 years old when I did this first performance with the band that we're talking about. I played drums in this band. The name of the band was Seventh Gate.
That's so metal.
We're so metal, dude. And there are obviously no metal clubs around that area, but there was a little R&B hip hop kind of club called the Fresh Avenue.
Oh wow.
So we got a gig at the Fresh Avenue, but on the way to the gig, I stopped to get a drink at a convenience store, and I walk up to the counter to pay for my drink, and I noticed that there's a whole box of smoke bombs. And that's when the creative genius just woke in my life.
I'm already dying.
So I buy the whole box, not just one or two. I buy the box.
Did it say smoke bombs on it?
Oh, it did. It said smoke bombs. But what I didn't realize is that smoke bombs stink to high heaven.
Yes.
And they smell like sulfur. It's like you're walking through the sewer or something. I didn't know this. I was thinking, oh, pyrotechnics, smoke machine, we're going to be rock stars.
Yeah.
So I buy these and I get to the gig. And I wanted to surprise my band members. And so I
didn't even tell them.
No, I didn't.
I brought a little something.
Yeah. And so I set up like 13 smoke bombs all around my drum kit. And it was really hilarious because I used to have these skulls that I would put around my drum set. And so I would put a smoke bomb in each of the eye sockets.
Oh my gosh. This is actually, to be honest with you, really well planned out.
Oh.
With the absence of the actual information about what it is you're working with.
Exactly. So, before the show, everybody's on stage, tuning the guitars and getting ready. And I began lighting these smoke bombs. And it's like a fire hydrant of smoke shooting out of every one of these. And suddenly I realized I can't stop these things, and that it's just going. And the more that it goes, the more that it's like smelling this whole club.
Oh gosh.
And suddenly I just hear people starting to cough, and people are running for the back exit. I can't see, but I see a little faint shape of light that looks like a door in the back where people are running out the exit, and then finally the smoke lifts and I just see the lead singer of the band like looking at me like, what the hell are you thinking?
Oh, this is so good.
And man, that was my introduction into the world of music and art and live performance and theatrics. And so it could only go up from there.
True story. So I love the story for so many reasons. One, it's just classic. It's just like everything about it, like just Stickstown. You're already like on the fringes because you're in a Stickstown. You're an R&B club, which is like a risk they took.
Totally.
And then you come in. So it's funny as hell. And yet that moment of like, I'm going to try this thing.
Yes.
And this might not work out. Like you sort of theoretically and hopefully you sort of live there. Totally. Like that you don't stop doing that.
Absolutely.
You keep doing that. And once in a while, we hopefully get better, but once in a while, it kind of goes that way.
Yes,
Where folks
that's
are
right.
like, this literally stinks
Yeah.
and I'm leaving.
Well, I mean, dude, I have stories on this for days. And I mean, I don't, maybe to a fault, I've never been afraid to experiment. I've
Yeah.
never been afraid creatively to try stuff that sometimes is not humanly possible to pull off with the budget that I have to work with
Yeah.
or with the restrictions I have. That's never stopped me. And that has led to some really beautiful moments. And it's also led to some really funny moments,
Yeah.
Um, quick story. I don't think
Yeah,
I've told
please.
you this one before, but I was in drama, in high school, and I was, I got a couple of best acting awards. So this dramatic thing was in me even from
Yep.
them. But we went to state finals, and I was the main character in this play, and we were this is a big deal for us, a little
Yep.
nowhere school out in the middle of, and we made it to the state finals, and I had the lead role. Well, I never studied my script. I never looked at the lines. I was just like, I got this. I got this. I was like a gang leader, and so I had all these interactions with other characters in the play. Well, we got there, and we're in a theater full of about 200 people,
Yeah.
watching, judges, other schools, and I improvised the entire thing, and it freaked out all of the other cast members in the play because they were like, "This guy's off the rails. He's making up
That's not the line.
That's not the line."
Yeah.
And so there's this poor little girl that was really, she had stage fright anyway. And when it came time for her to come out on the stage, she had been witnessing me do this for the past 15 minutes or so at the play. And she comes out on the stage, and we lock eyes, and I just had this grin of mischievous on my face. She looked at me, she looked at the audience, and she faints. Like falls down and faints on the stage in front of the audience. And so I had a moment of panic, but I
Wow.
held it together, and I incorporated her faint into the script
Well, thank
until,
God you were improvising everything.
until the drama teacher, she woke up and ran off the stage crying, and people did not know if that was supposed to be part of it or if it was not.
Wow.
But my drama teacher was not happy with me, and needless to say, we did not win that year. But it was fun, and
Yeah, it is.
if this girl is listening to this podcast, I'm really sorry.
He's sorry. He's sorry now.
I'm sorry now.
Sorry now. It seemed to have worked at the time. Talk about collaboration then for a minute. That's a great little gateway into collaboration. A lot of what you do now, I mean, like, you start with a band, you've done some solo work, writing books for the most part, is kind of a solo effort up to a certain point.
Yeah.
Talk about the role of collaboration in your life. Again, I knew you initially through your curation of The Breath in the Clay, which is a big team effort.
Absolutely.
One of the I guess kind of like cliche pitfalls and critiques of the artist's life is the sort of lone wolf thing. You're out on your own. Mm-hmm. That's not entirely untrue, but collaboration plays a real key, a sincerely key role in a healthy artist life and pattern.
Yes.
So talk about partnership, collaboration, community in your experience as a mature artist.
Absolutely. Well, I think that, first of all, the myth of individualism it's just that. It's a myth, and it's dispelled from the beginning because, for instance, even if you are a writer, you are still collaborating with your pen, or you're still collaborating with the paper. You're still collaborating with your computer, your materials. If you're a painter, you're collaborating with the paint. Collaboration begins there. Not only that, you're also collaborating with every artist who's gone before you, who has shown you a model or shown you an example of what is possible.
Because by sheer nature of making what you're making in a genre or in a field, you're responding, reaction, participating in this has been going on and now you're part of it. You're already collaborating by getting into the genre.
Exactly.
That's good.
And I tell people somewhat jokingly, but also pretty seriously, I'm a bit of a recovering radical individualist,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is kind of odd because I've also been a community leader, and part of my gifting is bringing people together. But what I mean by that is that, so much of my drive to be original, or my drive to make art that hasn't been done before, or to set off smoke bombs in a nightclub, these things were fueled by a need to be set apart. And so, whereas I thought it was making me more creative, it was actually fighting against the creative process, because it was fueled in something that I had to prove to myself. It was more rooted in an angst of identity, if that makes sense. But what's interesting is my creative life, like even with the band that I toured with, Songs of Water, we were up to 9 members at some times.
Yeah.
And other times, the biggest inception of the band was 6 members, and everybody had an opinion, and everybody was a writer. And so it was always very challenging in some ways, but then also rewarding. And so now with the work, whether it's the work that I do on the podcast with Makers and Mystics, or whether it's the work that I'm doing in the Breath and the Clay community stuff, or whatever it is, I value the diversity of perspective so much. And I see the value of diversity within the creative process. I value working with people that I don't agree with, people that I work differently with. But the key to that is you have to cultivate some sense of humility in your life. You have to cultivate a sense of being more motivated by what you have to receive than what you have to project in some ways. And that's something that I've had to learn, is like, okay, I want to listen to this other person. So collaboration for me is not only vital to my creative process, but I think it's baked in to the creative process in general.
Yeah. There's the script that you flip somewhere in there is that in that process, or in the posture of humility, if art making for me, or an arts career, a creative career, whatever, is about making things, if that's what it's about, then I sort of default into a posture or mentality in which, like, I am capable, and I either am or should be capable. And so I'm enough to make this. So it's just part of that artist trap where, like, then you run into walls and you're like, oh shit, I'm not enough. And now you have the spiral. But once I can, and if I can, allow art making to be about my becoming as a person, that the project I'm working on, it's not about the project I'm working on. You and I both coach people through this. This is not about the project. This is about the person you're becoming.
Exactly.
And if that's the case, which I think it is, then working with other people and the humility it takes to say, I don't know how to do this, or I think I know how to do this. You probably have some better, that humble posture actually puts me in a position to more comprehensively become someone, which is actually the work of art.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that the end result is that you end up with more innovative or original works than you would have fighting for that, and so I think it impacts the art as well as your person in a positive way. And I've said it before, but for me, creativity is more about the process than the product. And obviously when we're creating something, there's nothing wrong with wanting a good end result. We want a good product, that's what we're making. We want it to look right. But I think that whether I fail or succeed by my own definitions of what that means, the process itself will never produce failure if I allow that process to have its work in me.
That's good.
And so some of my biggest failures have become the biggest milestones of advancement in my life, creatively and personally. And of course, sometimes there are things that we could avoid, and there are things that would be awesome if we didn't have to learn the hard way. But even those painful things that we go through, they serve to aid us in that becoming process, and I think at the end of the day, what becomes of my person is more important than if I wrote a good book.
in that context, then I'd love for you to talk about, as someone who's got a truckload going on, you it's not just you have a lot going on as an entrepreneur. Um, there is the cheap way to say it is it's kind of all on you in a way. Like if you're not moving the pieces on the board, the board stays the same and money doesn't come in. So it's not like there's a paycheck. This is one of the things that is different from what folks, traditional or safe careers, although there's really no such things as a safe career, is their pandemic. Um like there is especially early on, a kind of maybe fear that we live in, that like, if I don't do this well, I don't make money. I want to make a great book. I want to make a great record. I want to curate a great event. Yes, because I want to put good work in the world, but also like I really want tickets to sell. I want things because I like to pay for the thing
Yes.
that puts, that keeps my kids from the rain. That pressure on top of like the number of things that you're working at, how does Stephen Roach stay, I don't want to say stay healthy. What are patterns of rest look like for you? Patterns of rest and work. How do you maintain that sense of health? And you'll hear me say this, like part of why I'm trying to move away from the way I used to ask the question, like how do you stay healthy, is because it makes the default unhealth. Like how do you keep from getting unhealthy? I don't want to give into the idea that it's inevitable, right? Like, no, it's not. It's actually, so talk about your patterns of work and rest. This is obviously on my mind because I just wrote a book about it. What's that look like for you historically? What's it look like now? Talk about that practice in your life.
Well, it's been really challenging only because when you have the opportunity to work at something you love doing,
yeah,
there's no distinction between work and rest, or there's no distinction between work and play, because many of the things that I'm doing these days, I would be doing whether I got paid for them or not, because it's just an overflow of my curiosities. It's an overflow of the way I'm made, and et cetera, et cetera. And so that was something that my wife had to really help me fine tune. And it came in a very practical way of, she said, let me have your calendar. And she was like, okay, Monday from 8 until 12 is your podcast editing time. From 12 to 1:30, you're going to stop for lunch. And at 1:30, then you can resume this. And so she helped me to begin to curate my calendar and learn the skills of time management, and also to recognize the need for rest. And, even just pulling from a scriptural or a spiritual example, humanity begins in rest. It's like 6 days, there's the creative process, and then there's the rest, which begins the first, moment of human life or whatever. So I think rest is not the end of the day, but it's the beginning. We have to begin with rest. And that's a narrative I'm trying to flip on its head as well, is that rest is not something I do because I've exhausted myself, but rest is something that I begin with so that what I do will be energized in a whole different paradigm, if that makes sense.
I love that. I love the emphasis on the practical too. I mean, it's like it is a little bit funny. It's like, let me have your calendar. There's a joke in there. And yet it is really, specifically with the practice of rest for folks like you and I can't think myself into that. Like I can't, I will not philosophically put myself in a position to actually, I can maybe philosophically put myself in a position where it's like, I believe it, or I think it's probably valuable.
Right.
But actually executing on the practice of rest, I can't think myself into that. I actually have to just practically do it. It's one of those things. I was listening to was Rick Rubin.
Oh, I love it. Yeah.
And he made a reference to someone else. I don't know who it was. I'm just going to say it was Rick Rubin. It says, it's like, when you make music, when you're making art, and you're thinking about your audience doesn't always know what it wants. Like the consumer, the listener, they don't always know what they want until you've made it. And then they're like, oh my gosh, that's what I want.
Yes.
That's so true with regards to like joy and rest and wholeness and peace,
Mhm.
I wouldn't know what it was that I wanted and needed until I'm actually in it. Like, I give myself way too much credit, especially early in life, to think like I know what rest will feel like, or I know how much I'll need. You don't know that until you're actually in it. So you have to
Yes.
practice yourself into
Yes.
those actual healthy patterns long before you can say like this is how it's supposed to go.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
I agree with that fully. And I'll give you an example. Last night I woke up at like 1 a.m. and my mind was racing. And so I
Yeah.
found myself coming downstairs, writing, doing some things, it was just going. It's like, why do all these ideas come when I'm supposed to be resting? But what I've had to learn is a very practical, I just did some deep breathing.
Hmm.
And it's just very, it's almost like when we begin to recognize it, we can be self-aware and then help ourselves posture ourselves, to engage that rest, because you're right. I can't philosophize myself into it,
Yeah.
but I can say, okay, I'm making a choice. What helps me wind down? Let me do some deep breathing. Let me do some things here that's going to put me in a posture of rest. And
Yes.
so it's almost like I'm having to govern my own body, or I'm having to govern or steward my own experience. And that takes a bit of internal cooperation that I get right sometimes and I don't other times.
Yes. Well, the theme uh at Makers this season on transcendence. Uh, One way to talk about transcendence is to recognize, to acknowledge the notion that of just the more than. There's just more, and that there's more to me than I know. And part of my art practice is an adventure into seeing and knowing that. So, contextualizing my own life, I can't do that internally. I can't contextualize that has to come in the context of the structures that I give myself over to. So when my calendar, it's a transcendent practice. When my
Mm-hmm.
calendar says from 8 to noon, here's your thing, that's actually a transcendent moment in which like this thing that is not me is
Mm-hmm.
actually like has power over me. And I'm contextualized by this larger something of
Yeah.
to which I'm a part.
Yeah.
It's a it's
I
a
love
it's
that
a
practical transcendence.
practical transcendence. That's the
That's your
kind
next
of that's
book.
the kind I'm interested in. Actually, talk about when you say next book. I love naming the animals. We talked about it a little bit. And you when we talked last time and we were out together, you were talking about a book that you're thinking about writing and kind of been on your brain for a long time. Is this the thing you're pitching right now?
Well, maybe you can help me, because I have about 3 different book ideas, and
Oh,
I'm
really?
and I'm looking at which one may come to the surface the most. But I have been doing one because, on Makers and Mystics, we did a season on mental, emotional, and spiritual health for the artist. And
Yeah.
then we did another season of restoration for the heart of the artist.
Mm-hmm.
And now that we're doing art and the urge for transcendence, I'm seeing a thread between all of these things. And so over the course of
Mm.
these seasons, I've been basically writing a book. A lot of it comes out as the script on certain podcast episodes when I do a
Yeah.
solo script. And so that's what's really been moving me, especially for the arts community, coming on the other side of a pandemic and going back into, performances and somewhat of normative rhythms.
Yeah.
I'm really interested to unpack some of what I've gone through and some of what the other guests that I've had on the show have gone through. And so that's one of the books that I'm thinking about, is just
Yeah.
this restoration for the heart of the artist.
Yeah.
But man, I've been writing a memoir for the past 7 or 8 years,
Yeah.
just about some of the crazy things that I went through in that little tobacco town,
Yeah.
and some of the earlier experiences. I don't think the smoke bomb story will be in that one, so you got it here first, right? uh,
An exclusive, as it were.
Exclusive, McRoberts only,
Yeah.
but yeah, so I'm kind of toggling between several books
Yeah.
on the arts and,
How do you discern, like you're in a discernment process
mhm.
with books? it's, and with the podcast and with makers, you're in a perpetual discernment process.
Yeah.
Who do we invite? What do we spend? Where do we do it? In what order? It's a constant decision making process. I'd love for you to talk about your artistic professional discernment process. How do you decide? How would you go decide? You can talk about the books in this way in the context if it's helpful, but how does one decide like what to do when? One of the things that you and I run into when we're coaching artists is I've got multiple ideas. I don't know which one to get into.
Yeah.
What are the factors, practices? How do you pay attention to like what comes next and when? Talk about your discernment process with regards to making work.
No, that's really good. There is something that I've been paying a lot of attention to recently, and it's this Japanese practice of ikigai, if you're
Yeah.
familiar with that.
Yeah.
And so it's just a diagram that has this overlap between like passion and mission and profession and vocation, or what the world needs, what you're good at, what you love, and what you can be paid for.
Yeah.
And so when I'm thinking through all of these ideas, I'm thinking through all of those different angles. And so I think that's one reason why it's taken the memoir so long for me to finish, because it's not at the center of all of those things. It's a
That's good.
peripheral thing, but it's also a slow burn, and I'm not rushing it, but something like the book on restoration for the heart of the artist, it's timely. It ties into the community I'm serving. It's also something I'm personally interested in, and it's also something that I could make some amount of money from.
Yeah.
And so it kind of checks the boxes.
So go through the spectrum again, or the sort of the overlap with ikigai. It's passion.
So you have like on the outer rim, you have like what you love, what the world needs, what you can be paid for, and then what you're good at. And then when you get on the inner circle, you have passion, mission, vocation, and profession, and how all of those things begin to work together.
Yeah.
It's been tremendously helpful for me.
And again, the contextualization. This is again a more transcendent understanding of the artist's place in the world, that it's not just, and again, you and I probably will resonate here. Even in the, I'm paying a lot of attention to Rick Rubin now because I've been listening to his book. And so I was listening to a podcast conversation between him and Rich Roll, podcaster. And he does the thing that, I'm going to blank on her name. She wrote Big Magic. What's the name?
Elizabeth Gilbert.
They do this thing with the muse where like, the muse comes along and then like, and I'm like, and I don't not vibe with that. I get that.
Yeah.
I just feel like both of those folks in their execution, I'm going to critique Rick Rubin right now in public. I love him, and, please produce the next record. I would love that. But it's not enough. Like the inspired moment.
Exactly.
It's not enough. There are multiple factors. And if I over attend to the muse, to the inspired moment, to the passion moment, I don't attend to the other facets of my actual like human discernment process. And then I end up making lesser art. And you and I both, like, I've made lesser art because I'm doing this thing because I'm in it.
Right.
And it wasn't the right time because I'm thinking really specifically of a project of mine from 2009. I was like, I'm doing the thing. And I was like, no one's going to buy that. And I didn't think about that. I didn't matter that no one bought it, but it super mattered.
Yeah.
But like paying attention, like seeing myself and listening to the world, listening to my own soul is the cornerstone of art making. It's not inspiration and it's not talent. It's attention. Am I paying attention to myself? Am I paying attention to my world? Am I listening to the voice of the spirit?
Yeah.
That's the heartbeat of art making.
Yeah.
Not my gifts and not my talent. And the only way to be able to pay that kind of attention is to have altitude in your life, which is you've got to be a rested, whole, peaceful person.
Yes.
You have to be healthy to make good art. Have to.
That's right. That's right. I used to think of myself as a slave to the muse in a sense.
Yeah.
And if I didn't feel that sense of elation or exuberance or excitement about this thing, if I didn't feel that, I wouldn't engage it. Or I was a bit of a slave to the muse, so to speak. But as I've matured, hopefully, in both my personal life and as an artist, I've begun to see inspiration as a discipline that I can cultivate in my life. Now, let me explain that. I'm not suggesting that we can turn the switch on or off whenever we want. No, of course, inspiration hits when it hits. And that's part of the beauty of it, is that we don't know when it's going to come, when it's going to go. But we can posture our lives in such a way that we can be ready when it does come, and that we can also work with it. There's a quote from Tom Waits about this very thing, and he's just talking about driving down I-5 in California, I think, and the muse hits him, and he's got this idea, and he speaks out to the muse in that moment and says, "Can't you see that I'm driving? If you want to be made, then you'll come back to me when I'm in the studio." And I love that playful interaction with it, because you know, there are so many different factors that help us. Another thing that I draw inspiration from, no pun intended, is something that Ernest Hemingway would do in his writing. And Hemingway would never write himself dry. If he was inspired by something and he knew what was going to happen in the next scene of the story, he would stop. And he would come back the next day, not having written himself dry, but having written himself to the point that he didn't have to reinvent the wheel when he came back, but he left something there for the next day. And so there is a bit of discipline that I think we can cultivate that allows us, one, to treat our lives as a work of art. And that's one thing that was something that I've had to learn the hard way, as I was creating beautiful works of art, but my personal life was a mess. And I think that's so many artists. You can, look at Picasso and all these people that are creating incredible things, but they're struggling with addiction and suicide and broken relationships. And that's something that I appreciate Elizabeth Gilbert's perspective on in Big Magic, as she says, I just don't buy into the tortured artist thing, but I think that for me, maybe here's another way to say it. And I think I said this in Naming the Animals, but spontaneity is not the result of disorganization, but it's the reward of preparation.
100%.
And so I think that's something that we can learn as we mature as artists, is how inspiration can work with the practical setting your calendar, and how discipline, inspiration, spontaneous, and preparedness can all work together.
Love it. Well, I have admired and appreciated the way, not just the way you, personally and culturally, with Makers and Mystics and Breath in the Clay, you curate attention and point towards health, and again, you help other people contextualize their own lives in the practice of art, and as opposed to way too much creativity culture, sales culture, that like wants to make me an artist or just talk to me like an artist. Part of what you do is you help people find themselves in the context of the arts, of the tradition, so that we feel more part of a thing than we feel like we are like the thing. And I think that's magic. I think it's super vital. It's one of the reasons I'm such a fan of what you and your team is up to. And all the more reason why, like, I'm really excited about your next season of life personally, as you've taken time over the last year to reorganize, rethink, restructure, reposition yourself, because it's not about what you're making. It's about who you're becoming as a person in this tradition. And so I'm thrilled about the next book. I'm definitely excited about that memoir that will probably come out in 2040 something ish,
right.
whenever
exactly right.
whenever it's ready and whenever you're ready for it. But I like the work you make, and and I really like and value the way you go about doing it, and that you emphasize the practice of it more so than just the product. So I think it's super valuable, and I appreciate it, and I appreciate your time today. Thanks for hanging.
Oh man, dude, I'm a Justin McRoberts fan, and thanks for having me on the podcast.
Absolutely, dude.
Let's cause some trouble together soon.
And thank you for joining me for this episode of the At Seed podcast. If you would like to follow up with Stephen's authorly work, the book is called Naming the Animals, An Invitation to Creativity, and it is available anywhere you buy books. It's great. I think you'd really dig it. A lot of Stephen's work happens under the moniker Makers and Mystics. You can search makersandmystics.com. The podcast that comes from Makers and Mystics is regular. It's therapeutic. It is inspirational. A huge fan. If, on the other hand, you would also like to become one of the people who is the engine behind this podcast, you can visit us at patreon.com/Justin McRoberts. We would love to have you on the team. Until next time.